everyone, and welcome to today's Fireside Chat. My name is Ryan Brothwell. I'm the Director of Marketing at BCC Research, and I'll be your host. Today, we're diving into one of the most exciting emerging standards in AI, the Model Context Protocol, or MCP for short. To discuss the topic in more detail, I'm joined today by Scott Hall, who is an advisor to BCC Research on AI and AI products. Scott's been hands-on with MCP since its early days and will be sharing more on the technical side of things and giving some live demos showing exactly how it all works. Scott, it's great to have you with us here today.
Hey, Ryan, thanks. It's great to be here.
Right, just before we get started, some quick housekeeping. Please note that we will have a Q&A session at the end of the discussion. We will answer any questions you have. Kindly just pop those into chat. During that period, we'll also be running a series of polls to just get an idea of how everyone is adopting AI and adopting MCP in particular. These are designed to give you and the rest of the audience an idea of the current rates of adoption and the tools being used. And with that bit of housekeeping done, let's get straight into it. First, easy question, Scott. For those who are newer to this topic, let's start simple. What exactly is the Model Context Protocol?
Thanks, Ryan. Model Context Protocol is a relatively new standard introduced in November of 2024. So it's a year old this month. It was introduced by Anthropic. And what it is it's a bridge to connect AIs to the digital world. So it's a framework that is used to allow a program or a system to be accessible by an AI. It has a very simple set of tools structure that goes into making this available broadly on the internet with the appropriate levels of security and access.
Perfect. Thanks for that overview. Obviously, the overview doesn't quite go into why exactly MCP was created in the first place and what problem it was created to solve in the way that large language models access or understand data. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, in very simple terms, Model Context Protocol was one of the attempts to solve the isolation of AI systems, right? AI systems are incredibly powerful and have a huge amount of data at their fingertips, but it's mostly data that they've been trained on or is broadly and widely accessible. Inherently, most AI systems don't have agency. They can't perform actions out on the world that they're not specifically attached to. And Model Context Protocol does that. It allows AI systems to access data that is outside of their training in regular sets. It provides them access to digital tools to perform actions. And in some cases, it can be used to allow them to have agency to perform actions on behalf of their user. So those are the big three things that Model Context Protocol brings to AI.
Perfect. Talking about three things, from what I understand, the actual structure of the MCP itself is structured around three core components. That is the MCP itself, the application, and the manifest. Could you give us a quick breakdown of those three main parts?
Yeah, that is a simplification, but it's a really good way to look at it. The first part to address is the manifest. The manifest is essentially the user guide to the tool that is presented to the AI. So when you create an MCP server, you create a manifest, and it explains how to explains for the AI how to connect with the MCP server, what kind of security is needed. It explains what tools are available and what data is needed to be able to effectively use those tools. The MCP server itself is the code and the protocol that allows the connection with the AI. Most users don't interact with that level in a meaningful sense, except maybe entering a username and password. Most of the meat of what you're trying to do exists in the application that sits behind the MCP server. So this has the data that's trying to be connected to, the actions that can be delivered, or the tools, the functionality of the tools that are exposed to the AI system.
Perfect. Now, I believe you have a demo which can kind of help us explain that a little bit easier, I think, with the visual element. Would you be able to
Yeah,
show us? Perfect.
I can. Here we go.
Right. While Scott is
So
just getting that ready, I will just ask as a reminder that if you have any questions about the following demo or anything about what we've talked about today, please drop them in the chat and we will get to them at the end of the session.
So for the demos today, we're going to be using Claude and Claude Haiku because has a very nice connection to MCP and exposes a lot of information about it to the user as you're using it. So we're going to go very simple. We're going to ask the RAI, regular Claude, to play a game. First, we want to take a look at what we're connected to. You can see we're connected to an MCP server down here called Joshua. That becomes important. When we ask Claude to play a game, it thinks about that. A lot of times, if you ask, they'll propose just a regular game that they can play. Here, you can see Claude reached out to Joshua, got a list of games back, and is relaying those games to the user. Then you can come in, say, let's play Minesweep. And AI is pretty good. It ignores my typos and goes right back into the system. Following up on that call, it understands what games there were. It says, we want to play a game with the game name Minesweep. The MCP server returns the details about the game. It presents a link where I could click into and play a game of Minesweep. So while it's a simple example, it shows the process that AI runs through in answering questions related to a very simple API-driven MCP server. Let me turn this screen back over to you.
Excellent, thank you for that. I think, as with any new technology, never mind one that's just rapidly developing like AI, having actual visuals like that is incredibly important. So thanks for that. It makes it a lot more concrete. You did touch on a little bit, but I am maybe a self-professed Luddite. Obviously, using Claude AI there. Can you use other LLMs, ChatGPT, Gemini? Will they work with an MCP?
Yes, all the major AI providers have announced some level of support for MCP. It varies whether it's in the free offering or a paid offering or just enterprise editions. Each company has its own go-to-market model it's using for AI systems, but all the major providers support MCP at some level.
Perfect. As we've gathered today, well, one of the reasons we've gathered today is the fact that MCPs are already a year old. So, what are some of the main barriers you're seeing to adoption so far, and how organizations working around them?
Great question. Given it's only a year old, the first barrier that had to be overcome was just acceptance, knowledge, and experience. How many people actually knew the standard was out there or the technologies had come in place to adopt it. So what really happened for the first 6 months to 8 months of the year was just people getting used to the idea and the basic infrastructure being built to allow AI to become a functional standard in the AI ecosystem, right? What we've seen in the last 4 months is a rapid acceleration of adoption. You're seeing some wonderful AI tools come out, but what you're really seeing driving adoption now is the development of the ecosystem, right? If you were to go look on GitHub now, there's thousands of MCP projects out there that you can get code samples from and build from. But you're also seeing providers step into the market in a big way. If you look at hosting, I have Render and AWS with well-developed MCP hosting systems. On the back-end data, Pinecone provides a wonderful solution a lot of people use in their MCP tools. And one of the big challenges in big areas for security, authentication, Auth0 and Next.js, both of their tool sets have evolved rapidly to support the development of MCP servers and systems. So you're seeing the ecosystem develop to accelerate the adoption of MCP for both corporations on the consumer side and expanding in the developer world.
Perfect. So if I just want to touch on something you mentioned there, is it fair to say it's not necessarily a tech limitation so much as it is a education and maturity challenge as more developers learn how to use the technology effectively?
Yeah, as we've been talking with people and I've been working with groups, the era of it being a technical challenge is kind of passing, and we're moving into the area where it's about knowledge, understanding, and as big companies are moving into adoption, we're running into the time where policies are needing to be developed to address the maturity of the MCP ecosystem. And a lot of companies right now are at various levels of determining their policy patterns to be able to bring MCP into an environment in which way they are comfortable. So that's where we're really seeing the development now that will eventually drive adoption.
Perfect. Thanks for that. I think that makes things a lot clearer. Of course, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention that if you want to go into even more detail, please take a look at our recently released AI Adoption Index, which there's a link included in the chat, which includes all of these topics with including an entire section on MCP itself. Right, Scott, let's get into the weeds a little bit. Specifically, let's talk a little bit about how the different MCP servers work. I know there are two main types, deterministic and interpretive servers. Can you explain the difference between them and just give an example or an overview of it?
Yeah, happy to dive in here. This is not so much a difference in the standard for MCP, but it really ends up being a difference in how the MCP servers need to be architected and really specifically how they need to be presented to the AI. So how the manifests have to be tailored. Deterministic servers are like what we just saw with Joshua, a straight API driven environment. So here's a piece of data that goes in, here's the defined results that come out, very deterministic in its approach. Another example could be weather. Here, pass a location, I return the weather snippet. Very established, very structured. The other kind is interpretive, and this gets to the heart of where we're seeing a lot of development in the MCP ecosystem. It's a way of creating what you could call agent to agent MCP servers, where you're exposing an MCP server that has an AI sitting behind it that acts with some level of agency to the AI that is accessing it. Where you really see the differences come in here, again, is how you need to expose the content to the AI server.
Perfect. Again, I know this can be quite technically dense. It's all new technology. Scott, would you be able to give us a quick visualization of the difference there?
Yeah, I can show you a quick demo of this. This is here we're going to, since we already touched into a deterministic server with the demo of Joshua, we're going to touch into an interpretive server. And for this, we're going to use the newly released BCC subscriber MCP server that allows access into BCC's body of research. So what we're doing here is I have just because I don't need any more typos, a pre-written query. I paste in. For speed, I'm using Haiku in this call. You can use a higher token AI if needed. So what we've done is we've submitted a question. And like before, in this case, Claude is ruminating on the idea. It's trying to understand the situation. It's looking at what tools it has available, and it'll come back with the tool calls that it's going to make, right? So here you can see it access the BCC subscribe or MCP, right? It had its input, what years it's looking for, and its intent, market size forecast and growth trends. So it's providing that information to the BCC MCP server. What a list of letters there. Behind that, the AI that we've developed is taking those requests, gathering information, and preparing a response. And here you can see the response that comes back. It is not an API response, right? It provides context, information, it goes in, it cites sources, and it provides all the information back related back to Claude. Claude uses that information to present a fully written out and digested answer to the question back to the user. So that's an example, and you can see in the calls that go back and forth the difference between a deterministic and an interpretive server.
That's such an awesome demonstration, and I find it kind of mind blowing that we have this decades of data that this AI is able to kind of surface in such an easy way. Again, I just want to remind everyone that if you have any questions about the demo or anything else we discussed today, please drop them in the chat, and we will get to them at the end of the session. Right, Scott. As we mentioned a little bit earlier, MCP is officially celebrating its first year in the wild. Looking back, what have we learned so far, both in terms of technical performance and how developers are actually using it?
Well, as I said, year one has been a lot of just people developing technical understanding and the frameworks developed. What we've really learned is the applications of MCP are just limited by the creativity of the developers that can pull together amazing solutions that operate under MCP. PayPal, big company, they have a MCP solution out there that allows people to access elements of their account. Now, most of this is information. It's a read basis, what transactions have happened, how can it answer questions about your account. You have a company like Canva. They've produced effectively a creative API where an AI can work with the user through the Canva MCP to design solutions. It's fascinating to watch how that works. Um, what you see is lots of companies looking at tools to expose data. Another company, Notion, allows people to enter all sorts of information, take notes, whatever data you can find, you can fit into Notion, and it exposes that via MCP. So you could connect that into your AI, and your AI will use that in context to the answers it brings to you. So, what we've really seen is a huge growth in developments of the surface area of proprietary data that is being made available via MCP to AI solutions. What we're starting to see is a development of solutions that provide a level of agency to the AI to act on behalf of its users, where the AI can do things for the user as opposed to just digest information and present that back.
Wow. Okay. It really is fascinating just how quickly it's growing. Looking ahead a little bit, as we move into year two, what are the most important developments we should expect from the next version of MCP, technically speaking?
MCP has two main areas of development that's being focused on right now. There was another standard proposal that's being released. The two big areas of focus for the next year, I think, are going to focus on AI discoverability and use. And this is what advances in the manifest are driving, as well as security, right? The more we want to MCP solutions to be able to take on agency, we need to evolve along both those lines. We need to make sure those connections are secure and that the people logging into those MCP connections are who the server thinks they are. That's the security portion. The other is the manifest and the discovery, which is if an AI is going to need to solve a problem for a user, it needs to be able to look at the tools that are available to it and pick the right one, and then understand how to use that tool to achieve the user's goals. And that's an area where we're going to see a lot of development. In research I've done, we've seen improvements of 20 to over 50% in AI tool call effectiveness through manifest optimization. That's actually a higher lift than moving up to a more expensive token-wise AI. So what we're finding is that since AIs are acting on behalf of the users, we need to present information in a way that AI understands it, so AI can use these tools effectively. One interesting use case that we've worked on is with YouTube. We're working with an MCP server that exposed YouTube APIs. And it was interesting, the AIs could work very effectively on that solution. And it was actually a very complex solution without a lot of really good data being presented um, to the AI. So we were doing some research as to why this works so well when other solutions are challenged. What we discovered is there's so much out in the broad set of training data that is used for AIs about YouTube development, about YouTube APIs, that the AIs we were using had innate understanding of YouTube that allowed them to effectively operate the YouTube MCP. And when we're working on a more esoteric set of data around privately named tools that we were describing, we had to be a lot more specific and clear because the AIs didn't inherently understand that subject matter as well. So I think what we're going to see is a lot of evening out of performance over the next year on AIs as people learn to tune their MCP tools for the different AI models out there and for the inherent knowledge that these models bring to the table.
Thanks for that, Scott. I think that actually leads into one of the first questions we received from chat, which is maybe a bit of an obvious one, but how easy is it to set all this up, an MCP up? Let's say I have a tech team ready to go. How long will it take me to set it up? Will it take me weeks? Will it take me months? Will it take me days?
So here, when you say setup, we're not talking about building an MCP server. We're talking about connecting to one. Um, it should be minutes there. Accessing an MCP server, if it doesn't have authentication, is as easy as just pasting the URL for that into the connector. And most of the AI tools out there will understand that, connect, and go. If you is an authenticated solution, you need to put the URL and then eventually enter your username and password or put in an API key to connect. So on an individual basis with individual access tools, it can go very quick. Where it can take longer in the setup is if you're working in an organization where, as we mentioned earlier, the policies and the tooling around MCP and MCP access at scale are developing and evolving. And that's going to be one of the real areas, again, in tool exposure, we see development over the next year is making these tools available at scale. So it could take as long as it takes an IT department to understand the solution, vet it, and bring it into their environment, if that's the route in which MCP has to be connected.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Obviously, bringing it a little bit closer to home now, a lot of our audience are already BCC Research subscribers. How can they access the MCP?
Great question. I love talking about this. So we actually have BCC actually has two MCP servers. One is a publicly available server that doesn't require authentication. That URL is right there on the screen, public.mcp.bccresearch.com/MCP. What that one does is when you put in a search term, it provides you back a list of the reports most likely to match that term. So it's a sort of really, really advanced search that anyone can use to find great research and to get the public information about any report that we have. The subscriber connection, which is launching today, is available to any BCC subscriber. Just need to talk to your account manager. And what that does is that provides you the access that I demonstrated here today. It allows you to be able to put in queries around any topic, and BCC will go through all of our research, assemble the answers, and present you back a sourced summary. So you can use that to answer your question. You can use that to look at the sources and go pull down the individual reports as a subscriber and read them yourself. So should work for whatever your needs are. The third thing we want to announce is that coming in December is we are launching a web-based chat against the BCC dataset. So if connecting to an MCP server inside of your organization doesn't work, we're also going to be bringing out a chat interface with our data where you'll be able to log in right into the BCC website, do your searches right in line, have ongoing conversations with the AI so it can understand what you're looking for and can help you find and get that answer as fast as you can.
Perfect. And then, like, obviously, just based on the demonstrations and people have been using GPT for another couple of years, would that just be like talking to one of those agents where you ask for, you prompted for information and it gets right back to you?
Yeah, I mean, from a technical process, it's the same thing. We've done a lot of work behind the scenes to limit our AI responses to the data that we know and we can vouch for. You know, context is king. And one of the big challenges with AI solutions and market research out there is they produces great reports and it can access lots of data, but do you trust the data? Is it interpreting the context and age of the data in the right way to answer the question you're really asking? So we've been working on both the AIs behind our MCP endpoint as well as in the chat point to restrict the responses to data sets that we know and trust, which is the BCC research data sets. We will soon be extending that to other trusted data sources that users will be able to either opt in or opt out of, including in that research.
Perfect. I'm just looking at the results of our poll at the moment, and then some fascinating splits where we have almost half of people saying they're actively using MCP already, and then another half saying they don't even know what it is. I'm here to learn. So just from someone who's been working on it, how difficult is that education process? Do people integrating it into their firms? Do they need to sit down with staff and explain it? Is it an email? Is it a quick meeting? What's that education process like?
It all depends on the role and the what you're trying to accomplish with it. If you're just looking for great ways to bring, in this case, for our current subscribers, data into their environment, it should be a quick conversation on how that goes. If you're looking to develop MCP solutions and how to expose data, that's a bigger conversation around it that is probably more technical in nature. But I encourage anybody, if they have questions about how to, you know, access information, what their MCP environment is, and how we can do this, ask. We're happy to talk. We're happy to help everybody with this. This is a new environment, and we're all kind of figuring it out together. So look forward to working with our subscribers as well as any other interested parties in how we make these connections work.
Thanks for that, Scott. We've got quite an interesting technical question that's come in. A little bit earlier, you mentioned the manifest being a key factor in how well the MCP performs. For teams that are just starting out, what are some of the best practices for writing or structuring an effective manifest?
Great question. In a way, you can simplify it and look at, a manifest is a combination of an instruction manual and really good SEO. So it has to be written in a way that explains to an AI why it wants to use that tool. So what problem are you solving for the user? So why would you want to connect to this tool to use it? Then it needs to give enough context on each tool where the AI can understand why to call that tool and what information do I need. Now, what's interesting is I did a research study on this, and you can look at questions that users ask in a few different ways. Very direct questions, what we call golden path questions. So questions like what I put in, use BCC and do this. MCP servers can answer wonderfully because the user's instructing them what to do. If you look at questions that are slightly more ambiguous, so let's say you said, hey, I just want to know about what the future of data centers could look like. In our environment, why would they call? Are they looking for market research? Is this technical? So there's a lot of ambiguity that the AI needs to interpret to understand what tool to call. So the better you can explain the what, the why, and the reasons, that improves performance. So, we're working on a recipe solution, and by not changing any of the code behind it, just by tweaking the manifest, we improved the overall efficiency from 29% to 87% on ambiguous calls. So there's huge upside to taking the time to look at it, but you need to understand it very much from how the end users are presenting information, not how your developers want the questions asked, because users will almost never ask them that way.
Perfect. I actually think I find that's personally fascinating, especially as someone who's worked in marketing for a while now. I think this idea of SEO is decades old, so it's just good practice for companies that want to get ranked on Google or search engines, etc. How similar is it when you say SEO? I've heard the term GEO thrown around a fair amount recently as well. How similar are those two practices? Do you actually need to write differently from the LLM, or is it basically identical to what people have been doing for a while now with SEO?
Well, if you're talking about, there's two different aspects here. So for an MCP point of view, no, you don't need to write SEO like you need to write user-centric on how a user would want to use this. So that's an MCP consideration. If you're talking about how to get your information referenced inside of AI systems, so somebody like OpenAI references your content, then it is a little more like exposing with SEO. And you can use MCP to help with that. Example would be BCC's public MCP server. It gets used by AI agents separate from people hooking up to them individually. So
Okay.
you
Thanks
can
for
see
that.
some really interesting use cases, but it really depends on what problem you're trying to solve there.
Right. No, I think that clarity is important. Speaking of which, and I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, but we've received another more technical question from chat. Are there any off-the-shelf tools or SDKs available to help developers build or test MPC servers, or does everything have to be created from scratch?
To build or test MCP servers. So uh, it kind of depends on the technical environment in which you're working in. Because as an MCP server typically connects to a backend application, it depends the language, the type of environment you're trying to bridge there. Defines a lot of what tools you need to find. Um, for a lot of common development spaces, there's a ton of great examples out there. And like I said, individual service providers are making those connections easier and easier. Uh, I'm a big fan of Render as a hosting provider for MCP solutions. There's a lot of great examples with them on how to set it up, how to use it, and then just make API calls from there to your environment. Again, depending on the security levels of what you're trying to achieve. So I would say there are fantastic tools, but they tend to be very environment dependent at this point. There's not a lot of broad general tools that are not what I would call specific developer tools. There are some great packages available on GitHub that you can install on your local system to monitor connections, but those go beyond the scope of most users and what they're trying to do and work in the environment.
Thanks for that. Got an interesting question here about the data itself. How frequently are the data sets that the MCP is referring to updated? Is the information current or dated? And I think that's quite important because I know certainly when I've used ChatGPT in the past, especially about something that's a relatively new event, it kind of throws up bad information.
So I'm going to answer this question in two pieces. I'm going to answer it generally. So because MCP is just making a connection to a backend system, the data that is provided to the AI can be as current as is available in your backend data structure, right? So if you're exposing an API system that shows the balances of customer accounts, it could be real time on that. Now, let's talk about specifically about what we've done with the two BCC MCP endpoints. Um, those are current up to about 24 hours to everything published in the
Wow,
library. So as soon as a report comes in and gets published, it gets to the pushed out, converted to vector, and put in the two different MCP data stores that the different MCP points pull from.
perfect. So it's fair to say BCC researchers as MCP is almost as close as you can get to up to date.
It absolutely is. And that's something we've worked hard to put the workflows in place to make sure happen. Because if you're working in your tool, and then, one of the beauties of working in your AI for market-driven questions is your AI can request from, in this case, the BCC datasets with the context of your business. And it can ask the questions understanding the context of your environment. So your chat histories can know and understand geographic markets you're working in. It can understand what you mean with specific, abbreviations. And it can take all that context and use it in querying the data sets. So it solves you as the user from having to do that translation. It solves you as the user of having to explain all of this data that's needed to get to what you really want, to get to what's going to matter most and what will allow you to make smarter decisions in your business.
Perfect. Thanks for that. I'm going to pivot slightly to a more technical question. I hope you don't mind. It comes in, how does MCP compare to traditional API integrations or plugins? For example, if we already have an internal API layer, would MCP replace that or work alongside it?
Most likely, MCP would just use it. Right? In most environments, what you would do is you would set up your MCP server and you would set up the tool calls. So when an AI made a request of the MCP server would just call one of your APIs to retrieve whatever information is needed or perform whatever action is needed. So if you have a well-organized infrastructure with a strong API, exposing that via MCP is typically relatively simple. And there are going to be some developers that are rolling their eyes at me when I say that. This is all relative, of course. But the more evolved your API and backend infrastructure is, the more effectively you can expose it into AI solutions with MCP because you have a lot of the hard work already done.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Scott. I think we've largely answered all the questions that come through chat. I just want to remind everyone that you can access that Vertical Context website now. It's in the chat, as well as our latest report. Scott, I might just ask you again to just kind of give an overview of exactly what is being released today and what they can expect in December.
Happy to. So what is being released today is MCP access for BCC subscribers. So BCC subscribers will be able to create an MCP access to the BCC data source and query that data via their AI. So that's what we're releasing today. We've been talking about it with our subscribers for a couple months, and we're pleased to be releasing this to them today, and we'll be adding users to this system over the next several weeks. Already available to the public is the public MCP point that we talked about before, public.mcp.bccresearch.com/MCP. Anybody can connect to that and make queries of it. Look, it's a great place just to start to understand MCP. You can try that in and see how it works for you. So it's a great tool for that, and it provides a fantastic search interface to the BCC library and uses a lot of the information that we already have publicly available in our summaries and overviews. So there's a lot of great information there, even for non-subscribers, to be able to address a lot of their problems. What we have coming up in December is going to be the vertical context chat interface. So this is the interface where you'll have a chat interface directly to the BCC research data set. So you'll be able to go in, ask questions, ask clarifying questions, and we're working to the process of being able to get it to generate custom reports for you based on the information in our environment. So, look out for that. We're going to be seeing a lot of ongoing development, a lot of new data sources brought into that over the upcoming months. So we're very excited where that's going to lead.
Perfect. Scott, I just want to say thank you
Oh,
again. This has
one
been
last thing.
Yeah,
We're
absolutely.
also rolling out the verticalcontext.ai website, which is where we're going to have a lot of the information about these tools. And we're going to be publishing there regularly what updates, what changes we're making to these tools. So if you want to follow just the AI journey part of BCC research, check out verticalcontext.ai.
Perfect. Again, those links are in the chat. But if you want to ask any questions or have any queries, please feel free to reach out to us directly. Again, Scott, I want to say thank you again. This has been a fantastic walkthrough. We had some tricky technical questions there, and you took them in your stride and explained them perfectly. And it was just fascinating to hear you unpack it and explain it in such a clear way. So thank you for sharing your insights in the live demos today. To everyone else tuning in, thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to learn more about MCP or explore how it can be integrated into your organization's AI systems, we'll be sharing links and resources after the session. And remember, as Scott said, AI doesn't just need more data, it needs the right context. Thanks again for being with us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.